May 1943. Führerhauptquartier Wolfschanz, Wolf's Lair, East Prussia. The air in the concrete bunker was thick with cigarette smoke and the stifling weight of unspoken tension. Adolf Hitler, his face a familiar mask of controlled impatience, paced before a large tactical map of Europe. Around a heavy oak table, arrayed in their immaculate uniforms, sat the inner circle of the German High Command. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, head of the OKW, General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations, and a smattering of other grim-faced officers. The Eastern Front was a bloody stalemate. The Western Front braced for invasion. And the U-boat campaign in the Atlantic was facing unexpected reverses. But today's briefing concerned something that defied conventional warfare. Oberstleutnant Franz Halder, a senior intelligence officer, stood at the head of the table, his face pale with unease. He cleared his throat, a sound almost lost in the heavy silence. Mein Führer, gentlemen, we have an intercepted report from British intelligence. It concerns an experimental weapon. Initial assessments suggest it is highly improbable. Hitler stopped pacing, turning, his eyes narrowing. Improbable, Halder? Are the British now dabbling in witchcraft? Get to the point. Halder swallowed, his gaze sweeping over the skeptical faces of the generals. They refer to it as a bouncing bomb. Mein Führer, designed to be dropped from low altitude, skip across water, and detonate directly against dam walls. The report claims successful tests against scale models, indicating a devastating effect. A ripple of incredulity, followed by open contempt, spread around the table. Bouncing? Across water? Scoffed General Jodl, a sneer twisting his lips. Halder, are you suggesting the British have invented some form of naval skipping stone? Preposterous. Field Marshal Keitel, head of the Loyalists, merely grunted, but his disdain was evident. Another Allied propaganda stunt. They invent fantastical weapons to distract from their failures. Hitler's face, however, hardened. He walked to the map, pointing a rigid finger at the industrial heartland of Germany, the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr, our dams. The Möhne, the Eder, the Sorp, they are vital, and they are heavily fortified. No conventional torpedo or bomb could breach them. He turned back to Halder, his voice dangerously low. Explain this improbable weapon, Halder, with details. Do not waste my time with fairy tales. Halder, bracing himself, unrolled a crude sketch, hastily drawn from the intercepted fragments. The design suggests a cylindrical mine, rotated rapidly before release. The rotation causes it to bounce over torpedo nets, maintaining speed and trajectory until it hits the target directly beneath the waterline, where defenses are weakest. A smattering of disbelieving chuckles broke the silence, but it was General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, head of Luftwaffe aircraft procurement, who frowned. Rotating? Against nets? That would require precise speed, altitude, and release. Highly complex, Oberstleutnant, and very dangerous for the bomber crew. The fatal mistake was already taking root. The German High Command's ingrained belief that any effective attack on their heavily fortified dams must follow conventional, predictable patterns. They understood direct bomb hits, torpedo attacks, or sapper infiltrations. The idea of a weapon that defied physics as they knew it, delivered in such an absurd manner, was simply too far-fetched for their rigid military minds. They were so confident in the strength of their existing, traditional defenses that they were psychologically unprepared to believe in such an unconventional threat. Hitler, after a moment of silence, barked, "Dismissed? Halder, your report is noted. We will increase aerial patrols over the dams. But let us not waste valuable resources chasing ghost stories. The British lacked the genius for such improbable engineering." As Halder saluted and left, a palpable sense of relief spread through the room. The generals exchanged knowing glances. Another outlandish Allied claim, easily dismissed. They had laughed off the bouncing bomb. The thought that this improbable weapon would, in just a few weeks, shatter the industrial heart of their nation, causing an unprecedented catastrophe, was utterly beyond their comprehension. Their confidence in their own engineers and fortifications had blinded them to the most audacious and fatal mistake in military history. Spring 1943. Royal Air Force Upkeep Squadron Scampton Airfield, England. While the German High Command dismissed the bouncing bomb as a fairy tale, across the channel, a quiet, brilliant British engineer named Barnes Wallis was wrestling with the final, agonizing details of his radical invention. Wallis, a visionary aircraft designer responsible for the R-100 airship and Wellington bomber, had conceived of the upkeep weapon years earlier, a solution to a problem that had plagued strategists since the beginning of the war: how to destroy Germany's massive, heavily defended industrial dams. His workshop, a chaotic jumble of prototypes, blueprints, and mathematical equations, was far removed from the sterile bunkers of Wolf's Lair. Wallis, often seen with his signature unkempt hair and tweed jacket, worked with fierce, almost obsessive intensity. He believed implicitly in his bouncing bomb, even when much of the scientific and military establishment regarded his idea as sheer madness. The problem with conventional bombs was simple. To breach a dam, a massive explosive charge needed to detonate directly against a wall deep underwater, where the hydrostatic pressure would deliver maximum impact. Dropping a bomb from high altitude meant it would either sink too far away or detonate harmlessly on the surface. Torpedoes, the traditional anti-ship weapon, were useless. The Germans had protected their dams with formidable steel torpedo nets. Wallis's stroke of genius, the fatal mistake the Germans simply couldn't conceive, was to bypass the nets entirely. He designed a cylindrical mine, weighing over 9,000 pounds, filled with RDX explosive. The key was a unique delivery method. Specialized Lancaster bombers, flying at an incredibly precise altitude of 60 feet, and a speed of 240 miles per hour, would spin the bomb backwards at 500 revolutions per minute just before release. The backspin, Wallis explained to the skeptical air marshal, demonstrating with a model across a water tank, causes the bomb to hydroplane across the water like a skipping stone. It literally bounces over the torpedo nets. When it reaches the dam wall, the backspin forces it to cling to the wall as it sinks, detonating at the ideal depth. The early tests had been fraught with failure and ridicule. Bombs broke up on impact with the water, skipped wildly off target, or sank prematurely. Many in the RAF, desperate for results, urged Wallis to abandon his toy. But a small, dedicated team, including the determined squadron leader Guy Gibson, selected to lead the mission, saw the genius in Wallis's madness. They spent months in secret, perfecting the bombing technique, often in dead of night, practicing over remote lakes and specially constructed target walls. The fatal mistake of the Germans lay in their rigid adherence to known physics and established defense doctrines. They believed their dams were impregnable because they were designed against conventional threats. The concept of a bomb that deliberately skipped across water to bypass defenses seemed like a child's game, not a serious military weapon. Their understanding of physics, while advanced, was focused on brute force and direct impact, not elegant circumvention. They simply lacked the imaginative leap to consider such an improbable solution. Barnes Wallis, isolated in his relentless pursuit, knew his weapon was anything but improbable. It was a fusion of physics, engineering, and sheer audacity. The bouncing bomb, once a dream of a lone engineer, was now a terrifying reality, ready to strike at the heart of Germany's industrial might, a devastating secret that the German High Command had dismissed with a scornful laugh. May 1943. RAF Scampton Airfield, England. The German High Command's dismissal of the bouncing bomb as a fairy tale was a luxury the British could not afford. For weeks, the specially formed 617 Squadron, under the command of the charismatic and intensely focused squadron leader Guy Gibson, had been pushing themselves and their modified Lancaster bombers to the absolute limits. This was where the dam busters are born. A unit forged in secrecy, relentless practice, and the daring belief in Barnes Wallis's impossible weapon. The training was brutal, exacting, and utterly unconventional. To drop the upkeep bomb with precision, the Lancasters had to fly at an exact altitude of 60 feet, no more, no less, and maintain a constant speed of 240 miles per hour. Standard altimeters were useless at such low levels, prone to error and distraction. How do you fly at 60 feet in the dead of night, over water, with flak waiting for you? A skeptical flight engineer had once asked Gibson. With a pair of spotlights, Gibson had retorted, pointing to the two powerful beams rigged to the nose and belly of the aircraft. When the light from both spots converged on the water, the aircraft was precisely at 60 feet. It was a crude, brilliant, and incredibly dangerous innovation. The pilots also had to contend with the unique aiming mechanism. The bomb needed to be released at a precise distance from the dam wall. Instead of conventional bomb sights, Gibson's squadron used a simple, ingenious device. Two wooden inverted V-shaped struts mounted on the nose of the aircraft. When the distant dam towers perfectly filled the gap between the struts, the bomb was released. It was a carpenter's tool, not a bombardier's, but it worked. This relentless, almost suicidal, practice regime took its toll. Crashes were frequent, as pilots grappled with the terrifying demands of ultra-low-level flying at night. But Gibson, a natural leader with fierce dedication, instilled in his crews an unwavering belief in their mission and in Wallace's madness. He knew that if the Germans had even a hint of what was coming, the mission would be doomed. The fatal mistake of the German High Command was not just their disbelief in the weapon itself, but their underestimation of the sheer audacity and ingenuity of the Allied forces. They believed their defenses were impregnable, not just because of their strength, but because no sane enemy would attempt such a dangerous and unorthodox attack. They were fighting a conventional war with conventional expectations. They failed to account for the dam busters, a squadron trained in an entirely new, almost theatrical form of aerial warfare. As the target date approached, the tension at Scampton became unbearable. The crews knew they were part of something unprecedented, something that could either lead to triumph or catastrophic failure. They had perfected the delicate dance of low-level flight, precise speed, and synchronized release. They had learned to trust the absurd simplicity of spotlights and wooden struts. The bouncing bomb, once a theoretical concept, was now loaded into the belly of the Lancasters. The men of 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, were ready. They were not just pilots and crews. They were the executors of Barnes-Wallace's grand, improbable vision, ready to shatter the hard German industry and prove the catastrophic fatal mistake of an enemy who laughed at what they could not comprehend. The night of reckoning was fast approaching, and Germany's vital dam stood, unknowingly, on the precipice of obliteration. May 16th to 17th, 1943. Over the Ruhr Valley, Germany, the moon, almost full, cast an eerie glow over the industrial heartland of Germany. Beneath its silent watch, the heavily fortified dams of the Ruhr Valley, the Möhne, the Eder, and the Sorp, stood sentinel, vital arteries of Hitler's war machine. On the ground, German anti-aircraft gunners and searchlight crews, well drilled in their routines, scanned the skies for the familiar formations of Allied bombers. What they expected was a conventional high-altitude raid. What they were about to face was a nightmare born of impossibility. This was the night of reckoning, the moment when Barnes-Wallace's madness met German complacency. Squadron leader Guy Gibson led the first wave of Lancasters, flying at an agonizingly low altitude of 60 feet. The roar of the Merlin engines was deafening, the trees on the riverbanks rushing past at eye level. Searchlights lashed out, and flak began to erupt around them, a terrifying curtain of fire. But Gibson's unwavering focus, guided by the converging spotlights and the wooden aiming struts, held firm. Fatal mistake, number one for German defenders. They were totally unprepared for an attack at such an absurdly low altitude. Their anti-aircraft guns were positioned and sighted for high-flying bombers, not for aircraft skimming the treetops. The gunners struggled to depress their barrels quickly enough, and their radar systems, designed for distant high-altitude targets, often failed to pick up the low-flying Lancasters until it was too late. Gibson's Lancaster, G. George, made its bombing run toward the Möhne Dam. The flak was intense, tracers slicing through the darkness. The wooden struts framed the towers. "Bomb gone," came the cry. The cylindrical mine, spinning furiously, hit the water, skipped 3 times with a terrifying splash, and slammed against the dam wall. A colossal explosion erupted underwater, sending a geyser of water high into the night sky. The dam held. Gibson, ignoring the flak, circled back, drawing enemy fire, a selfless act of courage that would later earn him the Victoria Cross. The next Lancaster, piloted by Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood, made its run. Hit repeatedly by flak, Hopgood's aircraft burst into flames. but he held his course, releasing the bomb before crashing into the lake in a fiery inferno. His sacrifice bought the precious moments needed for the next run. The third bomb, delivered by Flight Lieutenant Harold McMartin, again caused a massive underwater detonation. Then came Flight Lieutenant David Maltby. His bomb found its mark. The Möhne Dam, a monument to German engineering, groaned, shuddered, and then, with a deafening roar, breached. A torrent of water, millions of tons, tore through the breach, annihilating everything in its path, sweeping away power stations, bridges, and factories in a devastating wave. News of the Möhne's destruction quickly reached the nearby Eder Dam, where defenses were even sparser. After several agonizing attempts and near misses, the Eder also succumbed, sending another catastrophic wall of water down its valley. The fatal mistake of the German High Command's earlier dismissal now manifested as real, tangible destruction. The reports began to filter back to Wolf's Lair, disjointed, unbelievable tales of impossible attacks, of dams simply disappearing. The generals who had laughed at bouncing bombs would soon have to face the terrifying reality of their strategic blunders. The night of reckoning proved that imagination, even a seemingly mad one, could indeed defeat conventional strength and shatter the very foundations of an enemy's industrial power. June 17, 1943. Aftermath in Germany. War Office and Technical Bureaus. In the chaotic days following the Dambusters' raid, the initial fury within the German High Command slowly gave way to a desperate scramble for answers. The propaganda machine tried to downplay the disaster, attributing the floods to heavy rains, but the sheer scale of destruction in the Ruhr Valley was undeniable. Hitler demanded immediate reports, not just on the damage, but on how such a thing could have happened. This was a scramble for answers, a frantic, belated attempt to comprehend the fatal mistake that had allowed an improbable weapon to devastate their industrial heartland. General Lieutenant Walter Dornberger, head of the V-Weapons program, a historical figure representing German technical expertise, was among those tasked with understanding the new threat. His teams pored over fragments of the upkeep bombs, analyzed watermarks on surviving dam structures, and interrogated captured RAF aircrew. The truth, when it slowly emerged, was as humiliating as it was shocking. Mein Führer, gentlemen. Dornberger reported to a visibly agitated Hitler and his high command a week after the raid. Our analysis confirms the British did indeed deploy a rotating mine. It was designed to bypass torpedo nets and detonate precisely at the dam wall's base. The method is highly unconventional. Hitler slammed his hand on the table. Unconventional. It is an insult. Our engineers, our defenses, how could they not foresee such a primitive trick? The fatal mistake was laid bare. The German High Command's fundamental failure to respect the enemy's capacity for innovation, especially when it came to simple, unorthodox solutions. They had invested heavily in complex radar, formidable flak batteries, and massive concrete fortifications. Yet, they had neglected the psychological and strategic vulnerabilities of their own defense doctrine. Their arrogance blinded them to the elegance of Barnes-Wallace's simplicity. Dornberger continued, "The precision required for delivery is extreme. Mein Führer. Low altitude, exact speed, precise aiming. It appears a specially trained squadron was used, operating under conditions that defy conventional bombing tactics." Admiral Karl Donitz, head of the Kriegsmarine, known for his shrewdness and understanding of naval warfare, listened intently. While the dams were not his direct responsibility, the concept of a weapon bypassing nets intrigued him. He recognized the same rigid thinking that sometimes plagued his own commanders when facing Allied anti-submarine tactics. He knew the danger of underestimating the enemy. The German response was swift but costly. Massive diversion of resources. Thousands of workers, vital materials, and construction equipment were diverted from other war efforts to repair the Möhne and Eder dams. Enhanced air defenses. Anti-aircraft batteries around all remaining dams were significantly increased, forcing the redeployment of guns and crews from other critical areas. Anti-torpedo net extensions. Existing torpedo nets were hastily reinforced and extended, but without truly understanding the balancing mechanism, these efforts were often misdirected. The scramble for answers revealed a profound gap in German strategic thinking. They were excellent at perfecting existing technologies, at building bigger and stronger, but they struggled to react to genuinely novel threats that defied their established paradigms. The bouncing bomb, once a subject of ridicule, had forced them into a costly, reactive posture, proving that the most dangerous fatal mistake is to believe one's own capabilities are insurmountable and to dismiss the ingenuity of the enemy. The war, they were beginning to understand, was not just about brute force, but also about the audacity of an idea. June 17, 1943. Aftermath in Germany. War Office and Technical Bureaus. In the chaotic days following the Dambusters raid, the initial fury within the German High Command slowly gave way to a desperate scramble for answers. The propaganda machine tried to downplay the disaster, attributing the floods to heavy rains. But the sheer scale of destruction in the Ruhr Valley was undeniable. Hitler demanded immediate reports, not just on the damage, but on how such a thing could have happened. This was a scramble for answers, a frantic, belated attempt to comprehend the fatal mistake that had allowed an improbable weapon to devastate their industrial heartland. General Lieutenant Walter Dornberger, head of the V-Weapons program, a historical figure representing German technical expertise, was among those tasked with understanding the new threat. His teams pored over fragments of the upkeep bombs, analyzed watermarks on surviving dam structures, and interrogated captured RAF aircrew. The truth, when it slowly emerged, was as humiliating as it was shocking. Mein Führer, gentlemen. Dornberger reported to a visibly agitated Hitler and his high command a week after the raid. Our analysis confirms the British did indeed deploy a rotating mine. It was designed to bypass torpedo nets and detonate precisely at the dam wall's base. The method is highly unconventional. Hitler slammed his hand on the table. Unconventional. It is an insult. Our engineers, our defenses, how could they not foresee such a primitive trick? The fatal mistake was laid bare. The German High Command's fundamental failure to respect the enemy's capacity for innovation, especially when it came to simple, unorthodox solutions. They had invested heavily in complex radar, formidable flak batteries, and massive concrete fortifications. Yet, they had neglected the psychological and strategic vulnerabilities of their own defense doctrine. Their arrogance blinded them to the elegance of Barnes-Wallace's simplicity. Dornberger continued, the precision required for delivery is extreme. Mein Führer. Low altitude, exact speed, precise aiming. It appears a specially trained squadron was used, operating under conditions that defy conventional bombing tactics. Admiral Karl Donitz, head of the Kriegsmarine, known for his shrewdness and understanding of naval warfare, listened intently. While the dams were not his direct responsibility, the concept of a weapon bypassing nets intrigued him. He recognized the same rigid thinking that sometimes plagued his own commanders when facing Allied anti-submarine tactics. He knew the danger of underestimating the enemy. The German response was swift but costly. Massive diversion of resources. Thousands of workers, vital materials, and construction equipment were diverted from other war efforts to repair the Möhne and Eder dams. Enhanced air defenses. Anti-aircraft batteries around all remaining dams were significantly increased, forcing the redeployment of guns and crews from other critical areas. Anti-torpedo net extensions. Existing torpedo nets were hastily reinforced and extended, but without truly understanding the bouncing mechanism, these efforts were often misdirected. The scramble for answers revealed a profound gap in German strategic thinking. They were excellent at perfecting existing technologies, at building bigger and stronger, but they struggled to react to genuinely novel threats that defied their established paradigms. The bouncing bomb, once a subject of ridicule, had forced them into a costly, reactive posture, proving that the most dangerous fatal mistake is to believe one's own capabilities are insurmountable and to dismiss the ingenuity of the enemy. The war, they were beginning to understand, was not just about brute force, but also about the audacity of an idea. Post-war, 1950s onwards, military academies and engineering lectures. The bombs had ceased to fall, the sirens had long since fallen silent, and the war was a generation past. Yet, the story of the bouncing bomb and the Dambusters raid resonated through military history, echoing in halls of war colleges and engineering lectures. It stood as a powerful, often humbling, case study in strategic thinking, technological innovation, and the perilous consequences of military dogma. Barnes Wallis, knighted for his contributions, often reflected on the initial ridicule his madness had faced. He would explain that his genius lay not in inventing a new explosive, but in finding an impossible way to deliver it, exploiting a fundamental gap in the enemy's defensive philosophy. At various military academies, the German High Command's reaction to the bouncing bomb became a core lesson. Instructors would pose a question: what German High Command said when they first heard the British bouncing bomb test results? The answer, gleaned from historical records and post-war interrogations, was always the same. Disbelief, ridicule, and dismissal. This collective fatal mistake was meticulously analyzed. Technological arrogance. The German High Command believed their engineering superiority meant no enemy could devise such an absurd solution. They underestimated the enemy's capacity for unconventional thinking. Rigid doctrine. Their defense doctrines were based on countering known threats, conventional bombs, torpedoes. The idea of a weapon deliberately skipping over nets to detonate underwater was outside their established framework. Psychological blind spot. They simply could not conceive that such a primitive, in their eyes, and dangerous method could be effective against their impenetrable fortifications. Their laughter was a form of self-deception. The Dam Busters raid profoundly impacted post-war military strategy. It underscored the importance of unconventional warfare, the need to always consider asymmetric threats and solutions that defy conventional logic. Intelligence analysis, the critical importance of taking all intelligence seriously, no matter how improbable it seems, and investing in understanding enemy capabilities. Adaptive defense, the necessity for defensive systems to be flexible and adaptable, not just strong against expected threats. The echoes of the bouncing bomb can be seen in modern military technology. The concept of standoff weapons that avoid direct offenses, stealth technology designed to bypass radar, and smart munitions that exploit specific vulnerabilities all carry the DNA of Wallis's ingenious solution. For the surviving members of the German High Command, the memory of that day remained a source of bitter regret. They had laughed at the bouncing bomb. They had dismissed the impossible. And in doing so, they had allowed a single audacious idea to shatter the heart of their industrial power, proving that even the most formidable military can be undone by its own fatal mistake, the inability to imagine or to believe in the improbable genius of its enemy. The story of what they said, or rather, what they dismissed, remains a powerful testament to the enduring lessons of war.